My name is Patricia Wilson, and I'm about to tell you the most terrifying story of my life. A story about how my 16-year-old daughter's sudden, perfect behavior made me call the police. I know how that sounds. What kind of mother complains about her child being well-behaved? But trust me, by the end of this, you'll understand why sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't rebellion, but compliance. I'm 45. Been raising Emma on my own since her father walked out when she was 8. We live in a modest 2-bedroom house in suburban Ohio where I work at Midwest Insurance handling claims all day. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills and keeps a roof over our heads. Most days, I come home exhausted, ready to collapse on the couch with whatever leftovers I can scrounge up for dinner. Emma, my beautiful, stubborn, completely normal teenage daughter, has always been, well, a teenager. You know how it is. The eye rolls, the heavy sighs, the way she'd drag her feet when I asked her to do literally anything. Getting her to clean her room was like negotiating a peace treaty. Asking about her day at school? Good luck getting more than a grunt and fine as she disappeared into her room with her phone. Our daily routine was predictably chaotic. I'd wake up at 6:30, shower quickly, and start the coffee while calling upstairs for Emma to get moving. She'd stumble down at the last possible minute, grab a granola bar, and mumble something about being late while I tried to catch her attention long enough to ask about her plans for the day. "Emma, do you have practice after school today?" Yeah, whatever. "What time should I pick you up?" "I'll text you." And that was about as much conversation as I could expect. She'd grab her backpack, which was always a disaster of crumpled papers and forgotten assignments, and rush out the door. I'd follow 10 minutes later, already stressed about being late to work. Evenings weren't much better. Emma would come home around 5 or 6, depending on whether she had soccer practice or decided to hang out with friends. She'd dump her bag by the front door, grab something from the kitchen, and disappear upstairs. Getting her to come down for dinner required multiple calls up the stairs, each one more exasperated than the last. When she finally appeared, she'd sit at the table picking at her food while scrolling through her phone, giving me one-word answers about her day. I'd ask about homework, and she'd assure me it was done, or almost done, or, "I'll do it later, Mom God." The battles over putting her phone away during dinner had become so exhausting that I'd mostly given up. Don't get me wrong, Emma wasn't a bad kid. She made decent grades, B's and C's mostly, and while she could be moody and difficult, she never got into serious trouble. Her room looked like a tornado had hit it, with clothes everywhere and dishes I'd eventually have to go collect myself. She'd forget to do her laundry until she ran out of clean clothes, then act surprised when I reminded her that the washing machine didn't operate itself. Our weekend mornings followed the same pattern. I'd be up early, trying to get household chores done, while Emma slept until noon. When she finally emerged, hair a mess and still in pajamas, she'd wander to the kitchen looking for breakfast like she was surprised to find herself awake. "Mom, there's nothing to eat." "There's cereal, toast, eggs. That's not real food." "Then make something real." She'd sigh dramatically and settle for cereal, leaving the bowl in the sink for me to deal with later. If I asked her to help with chores, I'd get the standard teenage response, "In a minute," or "After I finish this," while she remained glued to her phone or laptop. The relationship between us had its tender moments. Don't get me wrong, sometimes we'd watch a movie together, and she'd actually put her phone down and lean against me on the couch. Occasionally, she'd open up about friend drama or a teacher she didn't like. But mostly, we existed in parallel lives under the same roof, me working to keep everything together, her living in her own teenage world. Money was always tight, which added its own stress to our daily routine. I worried constantly about making ends meet, about whether I could afford to replace Emma's worn-out sneakers or whether we had enough left in the grocery budget for the week. Emma seemed oblivious to these concerns, which was probably for the best, but it sometimes led to tension when she'd ask for money for movies or new clothes. "Mom, can I have $20? Sarah's having a sleepover and we want to order pizza." "Emma, I just gave you money yesterday." "That was for lunch. This is different." These conversations always made me feel guilty. I wanted to give her everything, but I also needed her to understand that money didn't grow on trees. She'd usually stomp off, muttering about how everyone else's mom let them do whatever they wanted. Our communication had become increasingly strained over the past year. Emma had always been somewhat secretive about her social life, but lately, it felt like she was living in a completely different world. She'd mention names of friends I'd never heard of, reference events I knew nothing about, and become defensive when I asked simple questions about where she'd been or who she was with. "You don't trust me," she'd say when I pressed for details about her plans. "It's not about trust, Emma. I'm your mother. I need to know where you are." "You're so paranoid. Nothing bad is going to happen." These arguments always ended the same way, with her retreating to her room and me feeling like a failure as a parent. Was I being too overprotective? Too suspicious? Other mothers seem to have such easy relationships with their teenage daughters, while Emma and I felt like we were speaking different languages half the time. The truth is, I missed my little girl. The Emma who used to tell me everything, who'd curl up next to me and chatter about her day, who actually seemed to enjoy spending time with me. This new version, sullen, secretive, and seemingly counting the days until she could escape, was harder to connect with. I kept telling myself it was normal, that all teenagers went through this phase, but it didn't make the daily friction any easier to handle. Looking back now, I realize how completely normal all of this was. The messy room, the attitude, the constant battle over chores and homework. This was standard teenage behavior. Emma was asserting her independence, testing boundaries, figuring out who she was separate from me. It was healthy, even if it was exhausting. But I also had this nagging feeling that something was shifting. Emma seemed more distant lately, more secretive than usual. She'd been coming home later, offering vague explanations about where she'd been. When I'd call her phone, it would sometimes go straight to voicemail, and she'd claim later that it had died or she hadn't heard it ring. Her friend group seemed to be changing too. Names I'd heard for years suddenly stopped coming up in conversation, replaced by people I'd never met or heard about. When I'd ask about Sarah or Megan, girls who used to be constants in her life, she'd shrug and say they were doing their own thing or being weird. I tried not to read too much into it. Teenage friendships were notoriously volatile, and Emma had always been somewhat selective about who she trusted. But still, something felt different. She seemed more guarded, more careful about what she shared with me. Our already limited conversations became even more surface level. The academic side of things was concerning too. Emma's grades had always been average, but lately even that felt like a struggle. I'd get emails from teachers about missing assignments or poor test scores, and when I'd bring them up to Emma, she'd get defensive and promise to do better, but the improvements never seemed to stick. "Mrs. Rodriguez emailed me about your history project," I'd say over dinner. "God, Mom, I know, I'll get it done." "Emma, it was due last week." "It's fine. She said I can turn it in late." "This is becoming a pattern. You need to start taking school more seriously." "You don't understand how hard my classes are. It's not like when you were in school." These conversations felt futile. I'd try to offer help, suggest study schedules, or ask if she needed tutoring, but Emma would brush off every suggestion. She seemed to think that concern about her grades was just another way for me to control her life. The social media situation added another layer of complexity. Emma was constantly on her phone, scrolling through Instagram and Snapchat, staying up too late texting friends. I'd instituted some rules about phones during dinner and after bedtime, but enforcing them felt like a constant battle. "Emma, put the phone away. We're eating." "I'm just checking one thing." "You said that 20 minutes ago." "This is important. Chloe's having drama with her boyfriend." "Chloe's drama can wait until after dinner." She'd sigh and set the phone down, but I could see her fingers twitching, desperate to pick it back up. Sometimes I felt like I was competing with her device for her attention, and losing. Despite all this normal teenage drama, Emma and I did have our good moments. Sometimes, when she was tired or stressed, the walls would come down a little. She'd actually sit and talk to me about school or laugh at something funny that happened with her friends. These glimpses of my old Emma always filled me with hope that we'd figure this out, that the distance between us was just a phase. But lately, even those moments had become rarer. Emma seemed more withdrawn, more in her own head. She'd sit at the dinner table, physically present but completely absent mentally. When I'd ask what she was thinking about, she'd just shrug and say, "Nothing," or "just stuff." I kept telling myself this was normal. Every parenting article I'd ever read talked about how teenagers naturally pulled away from their parents, how this separation was necessary for healthy development. I tried to give Emma space while still maintaining some connection, but it felt like walking a tightrope. Too much attention and she'd shut down. Too little and I felt like I was losing her entirely. The thing that really started to worry me was how Emma's entire demeanor seemed to be changing. She'd always been a fairly confident kid, maybe a little stubborn but sure of herself. Lately, though, she seemed more uncertain, more anxious about things. She'd ask fewer questions, volunteer less information, and generally seemed to be retreating into herself. I started noticing that she was staying in her room more, even when she wasn't doing homework or talking to friends. Sometimes I'd knock on her door just to check in, and she'd be sitting on her bed, staring at the ceiling or out the window. When I'd ask if everything was okay, she'd insist she was fine. But something in her eyes looked different, distant, like she was thinking about things she couldn't or wouldn't share with me. This was our reality as we headed into what I thought would be just another typical week. Emma, my normal, difficult, wonderful teenager, living her own life while I tried to balance being supportive and setting boundaries. I had no idea that everything was about to change in the most terrifying way possible. If someone had told me then that I'd soon be missing these eye rolls and arguments, that I'd give anything to have my stubborn, messy, typical teenager back, I never would have believed them. But sometimes, the most ordinary moments are the ones you end up treasuring most. Little did I know that this normal, frustrating, beautifully imperfect relationship was about to be shattered by something I never saw coming, and that Emma's upcoming transformation would make me question everything I thought I knew about my own daughter. It started on a Monday morning in late October. I woke up to my alarm at 6:30, just like always, dreading the usual battle of getting Emma out of bed and ready for school. I shuffled to the kitchen, started the coffee, and called upstairs. "Emma, time to get up, sweetheart." Silence. I gave it 5 minutes, then tried again, louder this time. "Emma, you're going to be late." Usually, this would be followed by the sound of her alarm clock being thrown across the room, some creative curse words muffled by her pillow, and eventually the grudging thud of feet hitting the floor. But today, I heard something completely different. "Good morning, Mother. I'm already awake." I stopped mid-sip of my coffee. Mother. Emma had called me Mom since she could talk. Mother was what she called me when she was being sarcastic or when she was really angry about something. But her voice didn't sound angry. It sounded polite, formal, even. I heard water running upstairs, which was strange because Emma usually waited until the absolute last minute to shower, if she showered at all on school mornings. Then I heard something even more unusual, the sound of her making her bed. Emma never made her bed. I'd given up that battle years ago. 10 minutes later, she appeared in the kitchen, and I almost didn't recognize her. Her hair was neatly brushed and pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her school clothes were clean and wrinkle-free. She was even wearing the cardigan I'd bought her months ago that she claimed made her look like a grandma. "Good morning, Mother," she said again, that same formal tone. "I hope you slept well." I stared at her, coffee mug halfway to my lips. Good morning, honey. You're up early." "I thought I should start getting ready earlier so I'm not rushed," she said, moving efficiently around the kitchen. "Would you like me to make you some breakfast?" "You want to make me breakfast?" I set my mug down, wondering if I was still dreaming. "Of course. You work very hard to take care of us. It's the least I can do." She was already pulling eggs and bread from the refrigerator. "How do you like your eggs prepared?" I watched, completely bewildered, as my daughter, the same girl who considered cereal a major cooking achievement, began making scrambled eggs and toast with the competence of someone who'd been doing it for years. She moved around the kitchen with purpose, setting out plates, pouring orange juice, even folding napkins and placing them neatly beside our plates. "Emma, this is really nice of you, but you don't have to." "Please, Mother, I want to do this." She smiled at me, but something about it felt off. Too practiced, maybe, like she'd rehearsed it. We sat down to eat, and Emma's behavior continued to be unnaturally perfect. She sat up straight, used her napkin properly, and asked polite questions about my plans for the day. She didn't touch her phone once, didn't complain about the breakfast she'd made, didn't seem to be in any hurry despite the fact that school started in 45 minutes. "This is delicious, Emma. Thank you." I was still trying to process what was happening. "You're very welcome, Mother. I'm glad you're enjoying it." She finished her breakfast and stood up. "I'll clean the dishes before I leave for school." "Honey, you don't have time." "I have plenty of time. I prepared everything last night so I wouldn't be rushed this morning." I watched her efficiently load our dishes into the dishwasher, wipe down the counters, and even sweep up a few crumbs that had fallen to the floor. This was the same girl who usually left a trail of destruction in the kitchen after making a simple sandwich. "Emma, are you feeling okay?" She looked at me with those same practiced smile. "I feel wonderful, Mother. Thank you for asking." She gathered her backpack, which I noticed was neatly organized, all her supplies visible and properly arranged. "I'll see you after school. Have a lovely day at work." She kissed my cheek, something she hadn't done in months, and walked out the door, leaving me sitting in my spotless kitchen, completely confused. I tried to shake off the strange feeling and get ready for work, but I couldn't stop thinking about Emma's behavior. Maybe she'd had some kind of revelation about responsibility. Maybe she'd finally listened to all my lectures about helping around the house. Maybe she was trying to make up for something she'd done that I didn't know about yet. But deep down, something felt wrong. This wasn't gradual improvement or natural maturation. This was a complete personality change that had happened overnight. The Emma I'd said goodnight to yesterday evening was gone, replaced by this polite, efficient stranger who called me Mother and made breakfast without being asked. At work, I couldn't concentrate. I kept thinking about the way Emma had moved around the kitchen, so confident and organized. Where had she learned to cook eggs like that? And that smile, it never quite reached her eyes. It reminded me of the fake smile she used to put on when we visited my mother-in-law, back when she was little and trying to be on her best behavior for someone she didn't really like. I called the school around lunchtime just to check if everything was normal there. "Hi, this is Patricia Wilson, Emma Wilson's mother. I was just wondering how Emma seemed today." "Oh, Mrs. Wilson, Emma was wonderful today. So polite and attentive in class. She even volunteered to help clean up after lunch. Is everything all right?" "Yes, everything's fine. She just seemed extra helpful this morning." "Well, whatever you're doing at home is working. She was a model student today." A model student. Emma had never been described as a model anything, and honestly, I'd been okay with that. I wanted her to be herself, not some perfect version of what adults expected a teenager to be. When I got home from work, I half expected to find the house back to its usual state of mild chaos, with Emma's backpack dumped by the door and dishes in the sink. Instead, I walked into something that looked like a magazine spread. The living room was immaculate. Emma's shoes were lined up neatly by the front door. Her backpack was hanging on the hook we'd installed months ago, but that she'd never once used. I could smell something cooking in the kitchen. "Mother, you're home!" Emma appeared from the kitchen, wearing an apron I didn't even know we owned, and that same bright, practiced smile. "I'm making dinner for us. I hope you don't mind that I started without asking." "You're cooking dinner?" I set down my purse, looking around the spotless living room. "Yes, I made your favorite, chicken and rice casserole. It should be ready in about 20 minutes. She untied the apron and folded it neatly. "How was your day at work?" "It was fine, honey, but Emma..." I also took the liberty of doing some laundry and tidying up around the house. I realized how much work you do to keep everything nice for us, and I wanted to help. She gestured toward the stairs. I organized my room as well. Would you like to see? I followed her upstairs, my confusion growing with each step. Emma's room, which yesterday had looked like a disaster zone, was now pristine. The bed was made with hospital corners. Her desk was organized, with all her school supplies arranged in neat rows. Her clothes were either hung up properly or folded in her dresser drawers. Even her bathroom was spotless. Emma, this is incredible, but... I struggled to find the right words. What brought this on? I've been thinking about how I can be a better daughter, she said, sitting on her perfectly made bed with her hands folded in her lap. I realized I haven't been very appreciative of everything you do for me. I want to change that. Honey, I appreciate the effort, I really do, but you don't have to be perfect. I love you just the way you are. Thank you, Mother. That means a great deal to me. But again, that smile didn't reach her eyes. I should check on dinner. We wouldn't want it to burn. Dinner was surreal. Emma had set the table with actual place settings, complete with cloth napkins. The food was perfectly cooked and delicious. She asked thoughtful questions about my day, listened attentively to my answers, and shared appropriate details about her own day at school. But something was missing. The Emma I knew was passionate, opinionated, sometimes difficult, but always real. This version was pleasant, but hollow, like talking to a very polite robot programmed to say all the right things. Emma, did something happen at school today? Is everything okay with your friends? Everything is wonderful, Mother. My friends are doing well. She took a sip of water, her posture perfect. Is there anything I can help you with this evening? Perhaps some paperwork or household tasks? No, sweetheart, just maybe we could watch a movie together like we used to? That would be lovely. You may choose whatever you'd like to watch. Even her word choices felt wrong. You may choose? Emma never talked like that. She'd say, sure, whatever, or as long as it's not some boring documentary, or only if we can have popcorn. This formal politeness was unsettling. We watched a romantic comedy that I'd picked mostly because I knew Emma usually complained about my movie choices. Tonight, she sat beside me on the couch, hands folded, making appropriate comments at appropriate times, never once reaching for her phone. When I laughed at a funny scene, she laughed too, but it felt mechanical, like she was following a script. Thank you for a lovely evening, Mother, she said when the movie ended. I think I'll go to bed now so I can wake up early tomorrow. Emma, wait. I caught her arm gently. Are you sure you're feeling okay? You seem different. I feel excellent. I'm just trying to be more mature and responsible. She kissed my forehead, something she definitely hadn't done since she was 12. Good night, sleep well. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what was happening. The rational part of my brain kept insisting I should be grateful. Emma was being helpful, respectful, responsible. Everything I'd been trying to teach her for years. So why did I feel so uneasy? Maybe it was because this change felt too dramatic, too sudden. People didn't usually transform overnight, especially not teenagers. Maybe it was because her politeness felt performative, like she was playing a role rather than expressing genuine gratitude or affection. Or maybe it was because, despite all our recent friction, I actually missed my real daughter. I missed her eye rolls and her sarcasm and even her messy room. This perfect version felt like a stranger wearing Emma's face. The next morning brought more of the same behavior. Emma was up before her alarm, bed made, breakfast prepared. She greeted me with the same formal politeness, helped clean up without being asked, and left for school looking like a picture-perfect student. At work, I found myself checking the clock constantly, anxious to get home and see if this strange new Emma would still be there. Part of me hoped she'd revert back to her normal self, that I'd find her sprawled on the couch with her phone, complaining about homework and leaving her dishes in the sink. But when I got home, the pattern continued. The house was spotless, dinner was cooking, and Emma greeted me with that same bright, empty smile. "Good evening, Mother. How was your day?" "It was fine, honey." I set down my purse and studied her face, looking for any sign of my real daughter underneath this polite facade. "Emma, can we talk for a minute?" "Of course, Mother. What would you like to discuss?" We sat down in the living room, and I tried to figure out how to voice my concerns without sounding completely crazy. "I want you to know that I appreciate everything you've been doing around the house," I began carefully, "but I'm a little worried about you. This is such a big change from how you usually are." "I'm sorry if my previous behavior disappointed you," she said, her voice calm and measured. "I'm committed to being better." "You didn't disappoint me, sweetheart. You're a teenager. You're supposed to be figuring things out, making mistakes, pushing boundaries a little. It's normal." "I understand your concern, but I assure you I'm perfectly fine. I've simply realized the importance of being respectful and helpful." There it was again, that formal adult way of speaking that didn't sound like Emma at all. My 16-year-old daughter was talking like a character from a Victorian novel. "Emma, do you remember our fight last week about cleaning your room?" "Yes, Mother, I apologize for my previous attitude about household responsibilities. You called me a control freak and slammed your door so hard that the picture in the hallway fell down. That was very inappropriate of me. I'm sorry. But don't you remember how angry you were? You had that math test you were stressed about, and you felt like I was piling on extra pressure by asking you to clean up." She looked at me blankly for a moment, as if trying to access a memory that wasn't quite there. "I remember being upset, but I realize now that my reaction was unreasonable. This wasn't right. Emma had been genuinely stressed about that test, and her anger had been real and justified. She'd been overwhelmed, and when I added the room cleaning demand, she'd snapped. It was a normal teenage reaction to pressure, and we'd worked through it together. But this Emma was dismissing that experience like it didn't matter, like her feelings at the time had been wrong. Sweetheart, your feelings weren't unreasonable. You were stressed, and I should have been more understanding about the timing. Thank you for saying that, Mother, but I prefer to focus on improving my behavior rather than dwelling on past mistakes." I studied her face, looking for any crack in this perfect facade, any sign of the emotional, complicated girl I'd raised. But Emma sat there, hands folded, expression pleasant and controlled, like she'd been coached on exactly how to respond to every possible question. That night, I made a decision that felt completely insane, but somehow necessary. I was going to test this new Emma to see if I could break through whatever was happening to her. "Emma, remember when you were 10 and you wanted to dye your hair blue?" "I'm sorry, Mother, but I don't recall that." "You do remember. We were at the grocery store and you saw a teenager with blue hair. You thought it was the coolest thing ever and begged me to let you do the same thing." "That doesn't sound like something I would want." "You said you wanted to look like a mermaid. You were so excited about the idea that you drew pictures of yourself with blue hair for weeks." Emma looked at me with polite confusion, as if I were telling her about a stranger's childhood, but I knew she remembered. That blue hair phase had lasted for months. She'd brought up the idea constantly, and even though I'd always said no, she'd never given up hope. "Perhaps you're thinking of someone else, Mother." "Emma, I'm thinking of you. You're my daughter. I remember everything about your childhood." "Of course you do, Mother. I simply don't remember that particular incident." But she did remember. I could see it just for a split second, a flicker of recognition in her eyes before that blank politeness took over again. Someone or something was teaching her to suppress her own memories, her own personality, her own voice. And that's when I knew with absolute certainty that my daughter was in serious trouble. The third day of Emma's transformation was when my mother's intuition shifted from confused concern to genuine alarm. I woke up that morning with a knot in my stomach that I couldn't explain, a feeling that something was terribly wrong with my child. Emma's routine continued exactly as it had for the past 2 days. She was already awake when I called upstairs, already dressed in perfectly coordinated clothes, already organized and ready for the day. But today, I decided to pay closer attention to the details. "Good morning, Mother," she said with that same practiced smile. "I've prepared breakfast for us." As I watched her move around the kitchen, I noticed things I'd missed before. The way she held the spatula was different from how she used to cook the rare times she'd helped in the kitchen. Her knife skills were too confident for someone who'd barely mastered making a sandwich. Even the way she folded the napkins showed a level of expertise that she'd never demonstrated before. "Emma, where did you learn to cook like this?" "I've been watching cooking videos online," she replied without hesitation. "I thought it would be useful to develop these skills." "What cooking videos? Can you show me?" "Oh, I watched them on my phone. I didn't save them." She set a plate in front of me with perfectly scrambled eggs and toast cut into neat triangles. "I hope you enjoy your breakfast." I pulled out my phone and opened the browser. "Let's look them up together. I'd love to see what you've been learning from." For just a moment, I saw panic flash across her face. It was so quick that if I hadn't been watching carefully, I would have missed it. Then the polite smile returned. "That's very kind of you, Mother, but I wouldn't want to make you late for work. I have a few extra minutes." I was scrolling through her search history, but it was completely clean. No cooking videos, no recipes, nothing that would explain her sudden culinary skills. "Emma, your search history is empty." "I must have cleared it when I was cleaning up my phone," she said, but I could hear the slightest tremor in her voice. "When did you clear it?" I don't remember exactly. Recently." Emma never cleared her search history. I'd tried to teach her about digital privacy and online safety, but she'd always been careless about these things. She was 16. The idea that she'd suddenly become concerned about her browsing history was absurd. At work that day, I couldn't focus on anything. I kept thinking about that moment of panic in Emma's eyes, about the expertly cooked breakfast, about the way she'd deflected my questions. I started making a mental list of all the things that felt wrong about this situation. Emma had never shown interest in cooking beyond the microwave level, yet suddenly she was making complex meals. She'd never cared about having a perfectly organized room, yet her space looked like it belonged in a home decorating magazine. She'd never used formal language with me, yet she was speaking like she'd been raised in a finishing school. Most disturbing of all was how she seemed to be suppressing or dismissing her own memories and preferences. The Emma I knew was passionate about things, certain songs, specific movies, particular foods she loved or hated. This new version expressed no preferences, no strong opinions, no personality quirks that made her uniquely herself. I decided to do some research. I spent my lunch break Googling things like sudden personality change in teenagers and why would a child become overly polite? Most of the results talked about normal adolescent development, depression, or trauma responses, but none of it quite fit what I was seeing with Emma. Then I found an article about something called grooming behaviors, and my blood ran cold. According to the article, predators often work to isolate children from their families by gradually changing their behavior patterns. They would teach children to be secretive, to maintain perfect behavior at home to avoid suspicion, and to suppress their natural personality traits that might draw attention. The article mentioned that victims often became unnaturally compliant and polite, especially with parents, as a way to deflect questions about their activities. They might suddenly develop new skills or knowledge that they couldn't adequately explain. Most chilling of all, they often began to disconnect from their own memories and feelings as a psychological protection mechanism. I read the article 3 times, my hands shaking. Every symptom described could have been written about Emma's recent behavior, but I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. Maybe Emma really had just decided to be more mature and responsible. Maybe I was reading too much into perfectly innocent changes. But when I got home that afternoon, my fears intensified. Emma was waiting for me with her usual perfect smile and spotless house. but I noticed she was wearing a piece of jewelry I'd never seen before, a delicate silver bracelet that looked expensive. "That's a beautiful bracelet, honey. Where did you get it?" "Oh, this?" She looked down at her wrist as if she'd forgotten she was wearing it. "I've had it for a while." "I don't remember seeing it before. I don't wear it very often." She quickly changed the subject. "How was your day at work, Mother?" "Emma, I've never seen that bracelet in my life, and I notice everything you wear because I'm the one who does your laundry and helps you get ready for special occasions." "Perhaps you simply forgot," she said, but again I caught that flicker of panic in her eyes. "I don't forget things like that. Who gave it to you?" I bought it myself, with my babysitting money." Emma hadn't babysat in over 6 months, and when she did, she usually spent the money immediately on makeup or snacks with friends. The idea that she'd saved up for expensive jewelry was completely out of character. "Can I see the receipt?" "I threw it away." "Where did you buy it?" "I don't remember the name of the store." "Emma, you're lying to me." The words came out harsher than I intended, but I was getting scared. You don't buy jewelry, you don't save money, and you definitely don't forget where you bought something new. Her perfect composure cracked slightly. "I'm not lying, Mother. I simply don't remember all the details." "Take off the bracelet." "What?" "Take it off, right now." "I'd prefer to keep it on, if that's all right." "It's not all right. Take it off." For a moment, we stared at each other, and I saw something in her eyes that looked almost like fear. Not fear of me, but fear of something else. Something bigger and more threatening than a mother asking questions about jewelry. Slowly, reluctantly, she unclasped the bracelet and handed it to me. I examined it closely and found what I was looking for, a small engraving on the inside of the clasp. RM. In elegant script letters. "Who is RM, Emma?" "I don't know what you mean." "There are initials engraved in this bracelet." "Who gave this to you?" "Nobody gave it to me. I told you I bought it myself." "Then why would someone else's initials be engraved in it?" She stared at the bracelet in my hands, and I watched her construct a lie in real time. Maybe it was used. Sometimes used jewelry still has old engravings." "Emma, this is clearly a new, expensive piece, and you're telling me you accidentally bought used jewelry with someone else's initials that you just happened not to notice?" She looked lost, like she was trying to remember a script she'd forgotten. "I don't know, Mother. I honestly don't remember all the details about the bracelet." I slipped the bracelet into my pocket. "Emma, I need you to tell me the truth about where you've been spending your time. Are you seeing someone I don't know about?" "Of course not, Mother. I'm always either at school or here at home with you." "That's not true. Last week you came home 2 hours late and said you were studying at the library, but when I called the library, they said they hadn't seen you." "Perhaps they were mistaken." "Emma, I know you're lying to me, and I know something is very wrong here. Please just tell me what's going on." For a split second, I thought she might break down and tell me everything. I saw her real emotions fighting to surface. Fear, confusion, maybe even relief that someone had finally noticed something was wrong. But then that blank, polite mask slipped back into place. "I'm sorry if I've given you cause for concern, Mother. I assure you that everything is perfectly fine. I'm simply trying to be a better daughter." That night, after Emma went to bed with her usual formal goodnight, I sat in my kitchen examining the silver bracelet under the bright overhead light. The craftsmanship was expensive, definitely not something a teenager could afford with babysitting money. The initials were professionally engraved, not some casual jewelry counter edition. I thought about Emma's behavior over the past few weeks, not just the recent dramatic change, but the smaller shifts I'd noticed before. The way she'd become more secretive about her whereabouts, the new friends I'd never met, the times her phone had gone straight to voicemail, the subtle changes in her vocabulary and mannerisms. But most importantly, I thought about that look of fear in her eyes when I'd pressed her about the bracelet. Not embarrassment about being caught in a lie, but genuine terror. like she was afraid of what might happen if she told me the truth. I made a decision that night that would have seemed insane just a week earlier. I was going to follow my daughter. I was going to find out where she went when she claimed to be at school or with friends. I was going to discover who RM was and why my child was so afraid, because every instinct I had as a mother was screaming that Emma was in danger. And if there's one thing I'd learned from 16 years of raising a daughter, it's that a mother's intuition is usually right. The next morning, I called in sick to work and put my plan into action. I was going to find out what was really happening to my little girl, no matter what it took. The morning I decided to follow Emma, I felt like I was betraying my own daughter while simultaneously trying to save her. I called my supervisor at 7 a.m., claiming I had food poisoning, then positioned myself down the street from our house, where I could see Emma leave for school without being spotted. At exactly 7:45, Emma emerged from our front door looking perfectly put together in her neat school clothes. She walked to the bus stop with that same measured, controlled pace she'd adopted over the past few days. I watched her board the yellow school bus and my heart sank a little. Maybe I really was losing my mind. Maybe she was actually going to school like she said. But something told me to keep watching. I drove to Jefferson High School and parked across from the main entrance, feeling like a complete lunatic. Parents don't spy on their children from parking lots. Normal mothers trust their teenagers to actually attend the school they're supposed to be attending. But nothing about this situation felt normal anymore. The buses arrived, and I watched streams of students enter the building. I saw Emma get off her bus and walk toward the school with several other kids. For a moment, I felt relieved and foolish. She was going to school. I was being paranoid. Then I saw something that made my blood freeze. Emma didn't go inside the building. Instead, she walked around to the side of the school, where the parking lot met a small grove of trees. A dark blue sedan was waiting there, engine running. I couldn't see the driver clearly from my position, but I could see enough to know it was an adult man, definitely not a teenager. Emma looked around quickly, then got into the passenger seat of the car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely start my own engine. I followed the sedan at a distance, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The car headed away from the school, away from town, toward a residential area I wasn't familiar with. They drove for about 15 minutes before pulling into the driveway of a modest ranch house on a quiet street. I parked several houses down and watched as Emma and the man got out of the car. The man appeared to be in his 40s, average height, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt that made him look like any suburban dad. That normalness somehow made it worse. He put his hand on Emma's lower back as they walked to the front door, a gesture that was too familiar, too possessive. Emma moved stiffly like she was uncomfortable, but trying not to show it. They disappeared inside the house, and I sat in my car trying to figure out what to do next. I called the police. 911, what's your emergency? I think my daughter is someone is hurting my daughter. The words felt surreal coming out of my mouth. Ma'am, are you in immediate danger? No, but my daughter is. I followed her this morning and she got into a car with a man I don't know instead of going to school. They're at a house now, and I think he's been manipulating her. What's your location? I gave them the address and tried to explain the situation as coherently as possible. The dispatcher was professional, but I could hear the skepticism in her voice. A 16-year-old getting into a car with an adult man wasn't necessarily illegal, especially if she went willingly. Ma'am, has your daughter reported any abuse or inappropriate contact? No, but she's been acting completely different. Her whole personality has changed over the past few days. She's been trained to act perfect so no one would suspect anything. Officers will be dispatched to do a welfare check. Please stay in your vehicle and don't approach the house. I waited for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. 2 police cars pulled up to the house, and I watched officers approach the front door. Within minutes, they had the man in handcuffs and were bringing Emma outside. She looked confused and frightened, but not in the way I expected. She kept looking back at the house, at the man being arrested, with something that looked almost like concern, like she was worried about him rather than relieved to be rescued. One of the officers approached my car. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm Officer Martinez. We need to talk to you about what you observed here." The next few hours were a blur of police stations, interviews, and terrible revelations. The man's name was Robert Mitchell, RM, the initials on the bracelet. He was 42 years old, worked in IT, and had no prior criminal record. To everyone who knew him, he was a quiet, unremarkable guy who kept to himself. But to Emma, he had become something much more sinister. "Your daughter has been meeting with Mr. Mitchell for approximately 2 months," Detective Sarah Chen explained to me as we sat in a small interview room. "He's been grooming her through social media, gradually building trust and convincing her that their relationship was special and secret." "Grooming," I repeated, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. "He used classic manipulation techniques. He told her she was mature for her age, that most adults didn't understand her the way he did. He convinced her that her normal teenage behavior was problematic and taught her how to act in ways that would make you less likely to question her activities." Everything clicked into place with horrible clarity. The perfect manners, the formal speech, the sudden domestic skills. Robert Mitchell had been training my daughter to be the ideal victim, someone so well-behaved that no one would suspect she was hiding anything. "He gave her gifts," Detective Chen continued, "like the bracelet you found. He also gave her a cell phone that you didn't know about, which he used to contact her and monitor her communications." How did I not know about a second phone? "He taught her to hide it and only use it when you weren't around. The manipulation was very sophisticated, Mrs. Wilson. He spent weeks breaking down her natural boundaries and replacing them with his rules." "What kind of rules?" Detective Chen consulted her notes. "She was to be polite and helpful at home so you wouldn't worry about her. She was to maintain good grades so there would be no parent-teacher conferences. She was to avoid deep friendships that might interfere with their relationship, and she was never, under any circumstances, to tell anyone about him." I thought about Emma's increasing isolation from her friends, her sudden academic improvement, her weird formality at home. Every change I'd attributed to normal teenage development had actually been the result of systematic psychological manipulation. Did he? I couldn't finish the question. "We're still conducting interviews, but it appears the abuse was primarily emotional and psychological at this point. He was building toward physical abuse, but your intervention likely prevented that escalation." The relief I felt was overwhelming, but it was mixed with guilt and horror. How had I not seen this sooner? How had I let a predator get so close to my child? "Mrs. Wilson, I want you to understand something," Detective Chen said, leaning forward. "Your daughter is a victim here. The behavior changes you noticed probably saved her from much worse abuse. Most parents don't pick up on these subtle signs." "But I'm her mother. I should have known something was wrong immediately." "You did know. That's why you called us. That's why you followed her this morning instead of accepting her explanations. Your instincts told you something was wrong, and you acted on them." Giles. Over the next several hours, I learned more about Robert Mitchell's methods than I ever wanted to know. He had targeted Emma through Instagram, creating a fake profile of a teenage boy to make initial contact. Once he gained her trust, he gradually revealed his real identity, spinning a story about being lonely and misunderstood, finding in Emma a mature young woman who was different from other girls her age. He had isolated her systematically, convincing her that her friends were immature and that her family didn't truly understand her. He positioned himself as the only person who really saw her value, who appreciated her intelligence and maturity. Classic grooming behavior that I now recognized from all the articles I'd frantically researched over the past few days. The training in proper behavior had been his way of ensuring she could maintain their secret relationship without arousing suspicion. He convinced her that if anyone found out about their special friendship, they wouldn't understand and would try to keep them apart. The perfect manners, the helpful attitude, the academic focus. All of it was designed to make her appear to be thriving so that no one would look too closely at what was really happening. He told her that mature relationships required sacrifice and discretion, Detective Chen explained. He convinced her that giving up her childish behaviors and friends was a sign of her growth and their special bond. The most chilling part was how methodical it had all been. Robert Mitchell had studied Emma's social media posts for weeks before making contact, learning about her interests, her insecurities, her family situation. He knew exactly which emotional buttons to push to make her feel special and chosen. "Where is Emma now?" I asked. "She's speaking with a specialist who works with teenage victims of online predators. This is going to be a difficult process for her, Mrs. Wilson. She's been conditioned to believe that this relationship was positive and that Mr. Mitchell cared about her. It may take time for her to understand that she was being manipulated." That evening, I finally got to see Emma again. She looked small and confused, sitting in the victim services office, nothing like the poised, perfect daughter who had been living in my house for the past few days. Her careful composure had cracked, and I could see my real child underneath, scared, vulnerable, and ashamed. "Mom?" she said when she saw me, and the words sounded like a question. Not mother in that formal tone, but mom in the voice of a 16-year-old girl who needed her parent. "Oh, sweetheart." I pulled her into my arms and she collapsed against me, finally allowing herself to cry. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I thought—" "He said I was special. He said he cared about me." "It's not your fault, baby. None of this is your fault. But I lied to you. I've been lying for weeks, and I changed everything about myself because he told me to. I don't even know who I am anymore." I held her while she cried, feeling her body shake with the force of her sobs. This was my Emma, emotional, confused, hurting, but real. The perfect, polite stranger had been a mask she'd been forced to wear, and now that it was gone, we could begin to heal. The specialist, Dr. Rebecca Torres, explained to both of us what the recovery process would look like. Emma would need therapy to work through the manipulation and rebuild her sense of self. She would need to understand that she had been victimized, not romanced, and she would need time to remember who she really was before Robert Mitchell entered her life. The hardest part for many victims is accepting that the relationship wasn't real, Dr. Torres explained. Emma believed that someone truly cared about her and understood her in a way that others didn't. Learning that it was all manipulation is deeply painful. "Will she be okay?" I asked. "With time and proper support, yes. Emma is strong, and she has something many victims don't: a parent who noticed the warning signs and took action. That relationship will be crucial to her healing." We drove home in relative silence, both of us emotionally exhausted. When we got to the house, Emma looked around like she was seeing it for the first time. "It feels different," she said quietly. "What feels different?" "Being here. For the past 2 months, this place felt like a performance stage. Like I was playing a role every time I walked through the door. Now it just feels like home again." That night, Emma asked if she could sleep in my bed, something she hadn't done since she was small. We lay in the dark, talking quietly about everything that had happened. "Mom, do you remember when I wanted blue hair?" "Of course I remember. You drew pictures of yourself as a mermaid for months." He told me that was immature. He said wanting to change your appearance for attention was something insecure little girls did. She was quiet for a moment. "But I did want blue hair. I really wanted it." "You can still want things like that, sweetheart. You're allowed to want fun, silly things. You're 16. I forgot that for a while. I forgot that I was allowed to be 16. Over the following weeks, the truth about Robert Mitchell's manipulation became even clearer. The police found extensive documentation on his computer, showing how he had studied Emma's online presence and planned his approach. He had saved screenshots of her posts, analyzed her interests and insecurities, and developed a comprehensive strategy for gaining her trust. He had been in contact with several other teenage girls as well, all following the same pattern. Emma wasn't his only victim, just his most successful grooming case. The realization that she had been part of a calculated pattern rather than a special relationship was devastating for her, but also therapeutic. It helped her understand that nothing about their interaction had been genuine. The legal proceedings moved forward quickly. Robert Mitchell pled guilty to multiple charges related to the exploitation of minors. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and his attorney advised him that a trial would only result in a harsher sentence. He got 15 years, I told Emma, when the sentencing was complete. Good, she said simply. I hope he gets help, but I hope he never gets the chance to do this to another girl. Emma's recovery wasn't linear. Some days she seemed almost back to her old self, messy, opinionated, gloriously teenage. Other days she struggled with guilt and self-doubt, wondering how she could have been so easily manipulated. Dr. Torres assured us that this was normal and that healing from psychological manipulation took time. One of the hardest parts was rebuilding her friendships. Emma had pushed away many of her closest friends during the grooming process, following Robert's advice that they were immature and holding her back. Some of those friendships were damaged beyond repair, but others proved more resilient. Sarah forgave me, Emma told me one afternoon, referring to her best friend since middle school. She said she knew something was wrong but didn't know how to help. She's been wanting to talk to me for weeks but was scared I'd reject her again. How does that feel? Weird. Good weird, though. Like maybe I can trust my own judgment about people again. The Emma who emerged from this experience was different from both the girl she'd been before and the perfect stranger she'd become during the manipulation. She was more thoughtful, more aware of her own boundaries, and more appreciative of genuine relationships. But she was also still recognizably herself, stubborn, passionate, and beautifully imperfect. "Mom, can I ask you something?" she said one evening as we were making dinner together. She had insisted on cooking again, but this time it was because she enjoyed it, not because she felt obligated to be helpful. Of course. How did you know? What made you realize something was wrong? I thought about it for a moment, stirring the pasta sauce. It wasn't any one thing. It was that you stopped being you. The Emma I raised is caring and responsible, but she's also stubborn and opinionated and a little bit messy. When you became perfect overnight, it scared me because perfect isn't real. Perfect is performance. He told me that my real personality was problematic, that I needed to be better. Your real personality is wonderful, sweetheart. It's what makes you you. Anyone who wants you to hide or change who you are doesn't really care about you. 3 months after Robert Mitchell's arrest, Emma started talking about wanting to help other kids who might be going through similar experiences. She began working with Dr. Torres to develop educational materials about online grooming for her school district. "I want other kids to know what the warning signs look like," she explained. "Not just for the victims, but for their friends and families. I want parents to know that if their kid suddenly becomes perfect, that might actually be a problem." Emma's presentation to the Parent-Teacher Association was powerful and heartbreaking. She stood in front of a room full of adults and calmly explained how a predator had systematically dismantled her personality and rebuilt it to serve his purposes. She talked about the gifts, the secret communication, the isolation from friends, and the behavioral training that had made her appear to be thriving while she was actually being victimized. The scariest part, she told the audience, wasn't the lies I told my mom. It was how I started to believe that the person he wanted me to be was better than who I really was. I almost lost myself completely. After her presentation, several parents approached us with concerns about their own children's behavior. Emma had given them a framework for understanding that dramatic personality changes weren't always positive developments. One mother thanked Emma tearfully, saying that her son had recently become unusually secretive and compliant, and that Emma's story had inspired her to ask harder questions about his online activities. It turned out that he had been in contact with an adult man who was following a very similar grooming pattern. "You might have saved my son," the woman told Emma. "I hope so," Emma replied. "That's why I wanted to tell my story, so other kids don't have to go through what I went through." Today, Emma is a senior in high school, college-bound and thriving. She still goes to therapy regularly, not because she needs crisis intervention anymore, but because she's learned the value of having a safe space to process her thoughts and feelings. She's rebuilt her friendships, developed new interests, and rediscovered parts of herself that had been suppressed during the manipulation. She also dyed her hair blue last month, not mermaid blue like she'd wanted as a 10-year-old, but a subtle blue-black that looks sophisticated and beautiful. When I complimented her on it, she grinned and said, "I decided I was ready to want silly things again." Our relationship is stronger now than it was before this crisis, not because trauma brought us closer, but because we learned to communicate more honestly with each other. Emma knows that she can trust me with difficult information, and I've learned to trust my instincts as a parent, even when they lead me to uncomfortable conclusions. Robert Mitchell remains in prison, where he'll stay for the next 12 years. Emma rarely talks about him anymore, except when she's doing her advocacy work. She's moved past seeing herself as his victim, and now sees herself as a survivor with valuable knowledge to share. The weirdest part, she told me recently, is that he thought he was making me better, like his version of me was an improvement. But that version wasn't even human. It was just a performance designed to keep everyone from looking too closely. And now? Now I'm just me again, messy, stubborn, imperfect me, and that feels like the biggest victory of all. Looking back, I realized that the most important thing I did during this crisis wasn't following Emma or calling the police, though those actions were crucial. The most important thing was trusting my intuition that something was wrong when my daughter became perfect. As parents, we're conditioned to want our children to be well-behaved, respectful, and responsible. But Emma's story taught me that sudden dramatic improvement in behavior can be just as much of a red flag as sudden problems. When our children change completely overnight, especially in ways that seem too good to be true, we need to ask questions. Perfect manners in a teenager might not be a sign of maturity. It might be a sign that someone is teaching them to hide. Emma's recovery taught me that resilience isn't about bouncing back to exactly who you were before trauma occurred. It's about integrating difficult experiences into your understanding of yourself and the world, and then moving forward with that hard-won wisdom. My daughter isn't the same girl she was before Robert Mitchell entered her life. She's more cautious about trusting strangers online, more aware of manipulation tactics, and more protective of her personal boundaries. But she's also more compassionate toward other victims, more confident in her own judgment, and more appreciative of authentic relationships. She's learned that real love, whether from family, friends, or eventually romantic partners, doesn't require you to change who you are. Real love accepts your flaws, celebrates your quirks, and supports your growth without demanding that you become someone else entirely. Most importantly, she's learned that her voice, her opinions, her personality, and even her teenage messiness have value. No one has the right to train that out of her, no matter how sophisticated their manipulation might be. And I've learned that sometimes being a good parent means being willing to seem crazy, paranoid, or overprotective in order to protect your child. I'd rather be the mother who calls the police over perfect manners than the mother who ignores warning signs because they don't fit the expected pattern of danger. Emma's story isn't unique, unfortunately. Online predators are sophisticated, patient, and increasingly common. But her story also proves that these crimes are preventable when parents pay attention to subtle changes in their children's behavior and trust their instincts when something feels wrong. If you're a parent reading this, I want you to remember that your child's safety is more important than their privacy, their feelings, or your relationship with them. If something feels off, investigate. Ask hard questions. Be willing to be wrong, but don't be willing to ignore warning signs because you're afraid of seeming paranoid. And if you're a teenager reading this, I want you to know that anyone who asks you to fundamentally change who you are doesn't really care about you. Real friendship, real mentorship, and real love accept you as you are while supporting your natural growth and development. You don't need to earn love by becoming perfect. You deserve love exactly as you are, messy, imperfect, beautifully human you. Emma kept that blue streak in her hair for 6 months until she decided she was ready for a change. When she dyed it back to brown, it wasn't because anyone told her to. It was simply because she had grown tired of blue and wanted to try something new. That choice, made freely without coercion or manipulation, represented everything we had fought to get back. The right to change her mind, to want different things, to be inconsistent and human and 16 years old. Perfect manners had nearly cost me my daughter. I'll never again mistake compliance for health or performance for genuine growth. And I'll never stop trusting the voice inside me that knows when something is wrong with my child, even when I can't quite explain why. Sometimes the most dangerous thing that can happen to our children isn't rebellion or defiance. Sometimes it's perfection.